Hey guys, I am really excited about today's video because we are in the time of history when it comes to the Constitution where we're talking about actually creating a new nation. We're creating the new Constitution. Everything up to this point has been vital and super important, but this is the moment where we actually create something that has never been created before. We're going to build it off of the building blocks that we've seen in Rome and with the Israelites and with the Anglo-Saxons. We're able to see a lot of the different pieces that we have experienced and the pieces that we have learned about from other people's experiences. They're going to come together in the actual creating of the Constitution, and we're going to learn about it this month. So this is the time that we've sort of been moving toward. We are going to actually be finishing up the book, The Stories of the Government, the Freedom Series number 6. We will finish that book this month. And then we are also going to watch a movie called A More Perfect Union. And I believe that is on BYU TV. It could also be on YouTube somewhere, I don't know. But this is a really great reenactment where you get to see a lot of the nitty-gritty details that went into creating this union. Because up to this point, they had talked about, oh, it's problematic and Shays' Rebellion and it's, yeah, people are upset and I don't really know how to fix it. But, we've got things that are more or less okay. Yes, we are disagreeing with the other states and we're starting to have some infighting between the states. And it's also true that we can't get a decent trade agreement to save our life with other countries because they see us as fractured. And, if they can't get a good deal with this state, they'll just go get a better deal with the other one. And because we are constantly competing with each other, we're not able to get ahead. So they acknowledged all of that. They said, yeah, all that's a problem. And also we have massive debts from the war that we were in. And we've also got some other issues going on. There are forts still in America from other countries. So they have several massive issues, but there seems to be a general sense of, but don't rock the boat. Because even though it's bad, if we do it, it could just be way worse. If we stick our oar into this thing, it could be a much, much worse situation. And you see people's reticence in this movie, A More Perfect Union, as they are coming together and they present this plan, right? It's the Madison Plan, and they call it the Virginia Plan, but they send it forward and they're like, okay, this is what we think we ought to do, which I think is just also super brilliant, that anytime you have a massive group of people with a lot of different opinions, you should always start with a product to begin with and say, now let's change it as needed. But if you just get everybody together and say, well, what do you think? Well, what do you want to do? And I mean, you can't even choose a movie to watch, right? It's much better if you have something to work from than it is to just hope that this group of people will come up with something to work from. So they did. Madison had this. He's called the father of the Constitution because he comes up with this plan and he proposes it. Actually, he doesn't propose it. Somebody else proposes it for him because he kind of wants to hide in the background and not be the loud leader that people have sort of accused him of being, because he's working so hard to get this group together and he doesn't want to come off as being the bully of the group. So he's kind of standing in the back. It's interesting to see all of these different characters and all of their different personalities. I didn't actually write this down as one of the books, but 55 Fathers is a really interesting story, a really interesting book that you can get to know the different characters and how they interacted with each other. But you can also see that in this movie, that some people just want to fight. And other people really want to find solutions, but they just care so deeply about their one issue or their two issues that they're not willing to give. And it took a long time and a lot of talking and a lot of finessing to get through a lot of problems that were so real and so legitimate that when we look back on it today, we're like, of course the slavery question was going to be solved through a war. Or I don't know how people look at that, but we have been a country for so long and we've been solid for so long that it's easy to look at and say, what was the big deal? So you had to work out some details. But the big deal was they weren't really working together as a country. They weren't really unified, and they had to really work to say, if we're unified, you'll still maintain all of the benefits that you get, most of the benefits that you'll have as a state, and you're also going to be able to maintain your identity as a state. This was big, that they were so scared. The little states were like, are you kidding me? You want us to form this new country where everybody gets a vote. Guess what? That means we don't get a vote. Ever. We are the smallest group. We're never going to win against the populations of these people in these huge states. Why would we do that? Especially because under the Articles of Confederation, you had to have a unanimous vote to get anything done. To pass any law, you had to have a unanimous vote. And guess what? If you were a small state like Rhode Island, often would vote against it because they didn't have that personal benefit. And so they would say, no, we don't want to do things that are benefiting everybody else. And so they would say no, and they shut down the whole thing. So because they required that it was unanimous, the one rebellious person got to control the whole situation. And the other problem that they had with the Articles of Confederation was that they didn't have the power to do anything. They were so scared of having a big, powerful government that the most this government could do was to suggest, we think you should pay us some money so that we can pay off our debts. That would be nice. What do you guys think? You don't want to? Okay, dang it. Right? It became this massive problem that they weren't able to pay their obligations, and they weren't able to pay, their soldiers. They couldn't pay the soldiers who fought the Revolutionary War because they couldn't make the states pay. They didn't have that power. They didn't have the power to tax and make people pay the taxes. So that's the kind of government that they were under. It was a problem for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and they were facing some massive problems as a country. So then they come together and they were able to have this constitutional convention, and George Washington runs it like, I don't even know what to compare it to. He closes the doors, he closes the windows. In Philadelphia in the summer, I would die. Without central heating or air, guys, there was no AC. And they were wearing like all the clothes that you could possibly wear and then a couple extra layers. They were hot, it was hard, and yet they didn't, I want to say that they didn't lose their tempers. I don't know that that's true. I think maybe some tempers were lost occasionally, but they really were able to stay focused and press forward even when tempers were lost. New York actually really lost their temper, although this is a cool story. This is really fascinating. New York, at the end of the Constitutional Convention, was basically going to divide the whole thing and say, we're not voting for this. And they were a big state and they were a powerful state. And they were so upset about the whole thing that they left the convention. They said, we don't have anything to do with this. And Hamilton was the only one who stayed. And sorry, this wasn't at the end. This was kind of at the beginning. And so he stayed and he's contributing and he's working things out. And then he's called back to his home state for I think he had some government stuff that he had to take care of there. So he goes back to his home state and he wants to vote in the end. And so he comes back, but he's not able to vote because his state, he doesn't have a quorum, but he was able to possibly, we think maybe, finagle it so that the people who really were against the Constitution came back home. And so we think he actually played a really important role in getting some of the stubborn characters out of the whole situation entirely. I don't know if that really happened, but reading between the lines, it looks like that might have been exactly how that played out. So anyway, you've got all these different states with all these different opinions and all these different things that they find are really, really important, and they have to work it out. And they have a couple of different committees that they work it out inside, that they're able to say, well, will you solve this one problem and then come back to us with a solution? Okay, so for studying this month, obviously I love it and I can just sit and talk about it, but I also have some actual things that everybody can do on their own. And this is called the Constitution Bee. It's found on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description. This is a program that a guy named Jeff Hymas put together. And he said that basically there are 5 clauses in the Constitution that we misunderstand today, that we are not applying properly today. And so he has a video on each of these 5 clauses, and the kids memorize the clause. They talk about what it actually means. They break down some of the language that can be difficult to understand. And he helps you just walk through how the Constitution was intended to be interpreted in these ways that it's not being interpreted today. And a lot of the problems that we're facing today come from this misunderstanding. And so if you will watch 2 videos every single week, then you will finish that program by the end of this month. So we're going to do that. We're going to watch A More Perfect Union, and we're going to finish up that book. And that's really all we're going to accomplish here in February. But I think that there's just so many conversations that can be had around not just the nuts and bolts of how did they organize this, but also some truths about how do you get along with people when the stakes are really high, when the things that you're discussing are super important. How can you get down to the principal layer and say, we all believe in this one thing that's really important? I mean, even if you don't believe in it, they actually had people who believed that slaves were less than, they weren't considered as high level as whites. And that is a fundamental difference of opinion, right? It's really, really hard to find a solution when you disagree on something so basic, but they found a way. And sometimes the way forward isn't getting it 100% right in the moment. Sometimes the way forward is saying, this is going to take some time. It's going to take a little bit of changing to happen inside of people and inside of states. And so we're going to allow for that time. We're going to do as much good as we can right now. We're going to set up the rules and the government and everything that we can, but we can't solve the slavery question right now, because if we tried to force it, it would take away, the whole thing would dissolve. There would be no constitution if that issue got forced at that moment. But if we're able to just say, let's do the best we can right now and put things in place that will hopefully make the whole thing die out, the whole institution of slavery die out on its own, that's what they did. They tried their very best to try to say, this is big and it's super important, but I can see that we're not at a place where we can solve it right now. So let's give it a little bit of time. That, if we can live that in our own lives and say, this is super important, but maybe we all just need to step back for a little bit and say the relationship is more important, or I don't know, find the most important thing and be true to that, and then say, this other thing we're fighting about is also really important, but maybe it just needs a little bit of time. People just need to have some time to assimilate the information and be able to deal with their big feelings and maybe their economic, everything is tied up in the decision, whatever it is. I just think that there's so much to learn by seeing how the Constitution was made, as well as seeing that the Constitution was made, seeing the nuts and bolts and seeing, well, how can you work through having, okay, so Rome had a division of labor, or, they had the different parts of the government separated, but they didn't have any checks and balances. This is a uniquely American thing, that the Americans said, okay, we want you to be separated, but we want you to have to sort of ask permission of the other branches to be able to perform some of your functions, right? So if you want to have a new person on the Supreme Court, the president of the United States has to say, I want this person. He has to present the name, and then the Senate has to approve and say, yes, you can be on the Supreme Court. That is a check. That is something that says you can't have everything you want. You cannot even do your job, Supreme Court. Like, if all of the judges died and the president never presented anybody else, and we didn't come up with, they didn't approve him through the House and the Senate, then the judicial system would die, right? It cannot exist on its own. It needs the others to take care of their part, to give permission to be able to press forward. Well, now, the judicial system, it also has things that it can check and balance other things. Did you know that although the House and the Senate, they can pass bills, they can pass laws, that's their job, they should do that, and when they come up, the Supreme Court can say that law is not constitutional. We're going to strike that law. Now, of course, the legislature can say, okay, well, we're going to amend the Constitution then to make it legal. There are things that they can do to work around each other, but the fact is it's slow. So people who feel really strongly about something might actually not be in power by the time it gets around to being voted on. But also they check each other. They make sure that the other person can't go too far without having to run into another one of the branches. And this is unique. This is something that only America has. In fact, I don't know if I'm going to get around to it. I'm not promising, I'm just saying, I taught Constitution and government to a younger group of kids where I set the tables up into a triangle around the room, and then each table represented one of the branches of government, and each one had a half of a puzzle piece. So all I did was I took a piece of paper and wrote what their responsibility was, and then I wrote, I drew some sort of a puzzle shape on it and then cut it out, and then the person that they were next to had the other puzzle piece. So the legislature can say, we passed this law, President, will you please sign it so that it can actually be a law? And the president can sign it, or he can sit on it and not sign it, and it will just become a law by default, but it's his way of saying, neener, I don't like this law, but I won't stop it, but I'm sort of saying I don't approve of it by not putting my signature on it. Or he can say no. He can veto that law and say, that's not a law. You can't have it. Now, back to the legislature it goes. If there are enough people in the legislature, 3/4, who can pass it again, they can override what he has just done. They can override his veto. So there's this you have to ask permission, and he can say no, but then you have the power to come back and say, but we really, really want it. Most of us really want it, and so we can override that. And every single one of these intersections between each of the branches has something where they have to ask the other branch permission, and the other branch can say yes or no. And so the way that I did that with the little kids is that they would make a decision, yes or no, and if they said yes, then they got to tape them together, and if they said no, then they would tape them together, and then they would karate chop them and rip them apart. But you got to see that if you said no too many times, then they would stop cooperating with you. So you got to see that in government, there's not only a check where you can say no, but there's also a balance where people say sometimes this branch has more power. Like if we are at war, the executive branch is going to have more power. He is the commander in chief, and so he doesn't have to go to all the other branches and ask their permission to do a lot of things. He has more power in that time. And then in times of peace, he has way less power. He's almost just a figurehead, he's supposed to be. And then the legislature has most of the power at that point. And then the quiet judicial, they have some power. Sometimes you feel like running away with it because we can pass all the laws we want and do whatever we want, and then judicial just hands back and all over the place. No, you can't pass that law. That's not legal. You can't do that. And so they have the power, and so sometimes the power really shifts to the judicial as well. A lot of the problems that we run into in America today is that those lines are not clearly delineated, and we don't have people karate chopping. Instead, we have them being quiet and then taking somebody else's puzzle piece. And so that is a problem. It's very important to know what your job is and who you have to ask permission to complete your job, because this is your thing. You have to complete your job. This is what you got elected to do or assigned to do. And if you don't complete your job, you're probably not going to be elected again. But in order to complete your job, you have to work with or get permission from the other branches. So what I'm saying is that I might eventually make a video explaining all of those different duties and the responsibilities and all the freedoms and the powers that are associated with all of that. We'll see. Let's finish these videos first. Okay, that was a lot, but that really wraps it up for the month where we're actually studying the creation of the Constitution. Now, it seems like that would be the end, and what else is there to talk about? But the truth is, it was hard to get it ratified, and then even after it was ratified, we had several situations where we weren't living according to how it was telling us to live. So we're going to kind of go over those in the next couple of months. That's it for today. You are doing a really, really important job. Being a mom, being a dad really, really matters, and you're doing a much better job than you think you are. Keep it up, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks.